Good evening. I bring you greetings from Orlando, Florida, where we are live from the 51st quadrennial session of the African American Methodist Episcopal Church General Conference. And I thank God for everyone who's joined us literally from around the world, those who are joining us from places both near and far. We're so grateful for your ongoing participation in our Christian Recorded Dialogues. To my dear friend and the editor of the Christian Recorder, John Thomas, who is usually live with me as we talk to some of the most transitional and transformational figures of our day, is not on live with me today, but I know he is in spirit and he will be back with us at some point or another with one of these sessions. I am so thankful to have who I believe is one of the best public servants the state of Florida could ever have. Now, I say that, but please don't tell his wife, Congresswoman Val Demings, that I said that. But when I speak to her tomorrow, I'm going to say the same thing about her, just so I cover my bases. But we're so happy and so proud to have the first African American mayor of Orlando County to join us. He is an AME brother. He is certainly no stranger to public service, having served as police chief, having served as sheriff of the county, and then in 2018, he made history by being the first Black to serve as mayor. Spent some time with him this morning for our press conference, along with several other of our bishops, and I was just mesmerized to be around him in person to hear why the people of Florida continue to elect him to public office. So, Mr. Mayor, we are so thankful to have just a few minutes of your time, and we're so proud to be in your district here for our 51st quadrennial session.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am truly honored to be here and to host you with the AME quadrennial here within Orange County, Florida. Orlando is the county seat, and so better known and marketed as Orlando, but the county is 1,000 square mile county and home to the world's largest theme parks. And here we're home to Walt Disney World and all of the Disney attractions and SeaWorld and Universal Studios and other theme parks. That's kind of what we're known for. But there's really a lot more to living here, and hopefully today we'll have the opportunity to talk about it. I am a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I was born and raised in the church, primarily because of the tolling of my mother. My mother was really the person who demanded that her children be brought up in the church, and she chose the Ame Church. She grew up in North Florida, in Quincy and Havana, which is in Gaston County and outside of Tallahassee. And so she was just a poor girl who ended up here within the area and met my father, and they got married and were married for 70 plus years. And my mother had one edict, and that is that you are going to go to church and you're going to get involved and you're going to be of service to other people and never think that life is all about you. So I'm grateful for that. Within the AME Church, I had a lot of mentors and people who sowed a seed into my life, and I'm happy to talk about some of those figures as we go forward today.
Well, thank you. Well, pardon my manners, Mr. Mayor, but let me first say to the AME leadership, and so I don't get in trouble, let me say from the top to the parking lot, and that should cover my bases within the well-established protocol of the AME Church, and certainly to my home bishop, Bishop Samuel Green, in the 7th Episcopal District, and of course to my uncle in the 9th Episcopal District, Bishop Ariel C. Wright and Supervisor C. Wright, and to all of you. And as always, for those of you who are watching us live, please share in the chat box where you're from, your pastor, in the Episcopal District that you may be representing here as you watch today's dialogue. Mr. Mayor, I jokingly say to people in my line of work that the road to heaven in the White House runs through South Carolina. But I say also, if you want to cut the line, you have to be a member of the Ame Church when you get to heaven. And so luckily, you and I will be able to cut the line because I actually grew up in Ame Church. I'm 5th generation strong as well. Mr. Mayor, let's get right to it. I've been always told, growing up in rural South Carolina, that the journey helps you appreciate the destination. Talk about your journey from the Sunday school version of your journey from there to here, because you have such an incredible story that I think the world needs to hear about. But for time purposes, we want to have the Sunday school version of that story of how you got to a little boy growing up in the Ame Church and now a man who has been elected more than once to several of the highest positions in your local area.
So I grew up here in Orlando, Florida, and initially my parents lived in an area called the Paramore area, which is one of the underserved communities here. We attended the Black church during the 50s and 60s. My parents lived for a portion of that time in the Paramore area, and we went to St. Mark African Methodist Episcopal Church. The church eventually moved to its new location in West Orlando, which was closer to where we ultimately moved to. I had the privilege of being in the church and being part of the AME
Get ready to meet safely at the African Methodist Episcopal Church 51st Quadrennial Session of the General Conference. It's taking place July 6th.
Something jumped in there.
We got you.
Okay. All right. So I had some great leaders like Reverend Dr. George Lovelace Champion, who during my formative years was a pastor at our church. He was forward thinking. He was quite the scholar and also writer, wrote many books and held various positions in leadership within the Ame Church. I grew up with, you mentioned Bishop Samuel Green. He was a friend. His older brother and I were in the same class. So I knew the Green family, and we all went to St. Mark Ame Church in Orlando. And we had these great men and women, I will say, that really cared about us as it was essentially an all-Black church. And we lived the Black experience in a blue-collar working community. And one of the things that I learned from the AME Church was that an education was a great leveler for all of us. So within our church, they made certain that we focused on getting a good education, and they had various programs for us as youth. And those who stuck with it, we were good students in school. And I am able to sit where I am today because I stood on the shoulders of some giants. Over time, there were just civil rights legends who came to visit our church, like Benjamin Hooks and C.K. Steele and some of the others who came through our church. I had the privilege of meeting Rosa Parks as an adult at my church. Once I was working in law enforcement, I was part of a protective detail for Rosa Parks, Reverend Jesse Jackson and others who came through the area. And so because of all of those experiences, we had real talk at my church about the African diaspora and what it meant to America and some of the injustices that we experienced and how we were taught to maneuver around those. And so I think that I had a solid foundation that allowed me to do many of the things that we've done now, having worked in public service for the last 40 plus years.
Mr. Mayor, you flirted with the AME Church's role, but I do want you to add some background color to your elected role. You've been a police chief, you've been a sheriff, and then in 2018 you made history by being elected as the first African American, I'm told, to be mayor of the county. Add some real background color from that, because we oftentimes highlight people who are doing the work upstream, whether it's Congress, presidency, etc. But when it comes to being downstream, we don't always talk about how important these roles are and the impact they have of having direct impact on communities, particularly those communities that look like ours and the ones we come from.
Well, there are some principles that I live by, and all of them are biblical principles. But because of the personalities that I had experience with, like even one of the female AME bishops, Bishop Gidrick, once said that in life, as you try to figure out the path that you will go down, she gave three words of advice. Said, pray first, aim high, and stay focused. Pray first,
That's a
aim
word.
high, and stay focused.
That's a
And
word.
so prior to, because of my background, one of the scriptures that the Ame Church talked to me about and taught me about was in First Chronicles chapter 4, verse 10, the prayer of Jabez. Oh Lord,
yeah.
that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my territory. And so I can tell you, before I ever became chief of police, my wife and I, we used to pray that prayer fervently, that God would enlarge our territory to enlarge his territory. And as a result of that, we sat back, and God has done that. We were trusting that we would be prepared to control the things that we can control. And that is, we could control how much education we got. We could control how much effort we put into various things. And so the rest of it kind of became a reality in 1998, after beginning praying that little small prayer about a Gimper, called Jabez. I was appointed in 1998 as the first Black police chief in Orlando. And after that, I went to work for the county government and was appointed as the first Black deputy county administrator and director of public safety. And my wife was appointed chief of police, the first and only woman to have served as chief of police here in Orlando. So I'm talking about how God enlarged our territory, gave us more responsibility. I then ran for sheriff after hearing a female bishop in the Ame Church say, pray first, aim high, stay focused. I decided to run for sheriff, and I became the 28th elected sheriff in Orange County, the first Black sheriff in this county, only the third Black to have been elected in the state of Florida since Reconstruction to the office of sheriff. And then in 2018, I became the 5th elected county mayor and the first Black to serve as the county-wide mayor. This is a 1,000 square mile county, the 5th largest county in Florida, 1.4 million people who live here, a budget that we control now of $4.9 billion. And so for a poor kid who grew up in West Orlando to be able to accomplish these things, be a first, and have a wife. Now, my wife, in terms of enlarging our territory, she ran and was elected to the United States House of Representatives and was the first Black female from this area to represent Congressional District 10 here in Florida within the U.S. House. And now she's running for the United States Senate. And we believe that she's going to be a significant candidate to win that race in 2022. So that is the Demings family. Both of us my wife and I are the sons of women who were maids, who cleaned houses for a living. My father drove taxi cabs, a blue collar worker. My wife's father, he was a gardener. And so they all had blue collar jobs. They didn't have the privilege we had of going to college and getting an education. But these blue collar workers were able to raise children, to be able to do extraordinary things. And all of that, in the center of that was the Ame Church. My wife grew up in Jacksonville. Her parents, one went to the Baptist church and one went to the Ame Church. So I told her she married an AME, so therefore she's an AME. And so here we are serving the world. We believe that the service that we render to other people is the rent we pay for living on planet Earth.
Mr. Mayor, I want to talk about your profession for a second. There's lots of chatter all around the country about law enforcement, whether you're pro law enforcement, anti-law enforcement, lots of chatter in the ecosystem. I can tell you as someone who's a political consultant, having elected who's now the sheriff of the year, Sheriff Leon Lott in Richland County in South Carolina. I can tell you, I'm a firm believer that we need law enforcement, but there are people who feel like law enforcement has not been what it needs to be for communities to look like ours. Black people are 3 to 4 times more likely to be killed, mishandled, which means treated like a second-class citizen at the hands of law enforcement. There's lots of discussions about how we reform it, reimagine, etc. Can you talk about how do you see law enforcement playing a role in our communities and what that should look like, being a former law enforcement person yourself?
There's no question that America has a history of treating Black people inhumanely. Of course, our ancestors were enslaved. I'm the great grandson of slaves. My father lives on at 99 years old. He was born and raised in Alabama. I was born and raised in the South. As a Black man, I'm the youngest of 5 children, although I have a twin brother. We certainly had our bouts with racism, but we did not let that inhibit who we would become in life. Now, as a former law enforcement officer, I spent nearly 4 decades working in law enforcement, trying to change the system, a discriminatory, unjust system from within the system, as opposed to being outside the system. In other words, I got into the arena.
That's
now,
right.
we, in terms of our life advocacies, you can bring about change by being an advocate from outside organizations, and we need the advocacy. We need the civil rights organizations to do what they do. I'm a life member of the NAACP and a number of other organizations. You know, I got involved in Black fraternal organizations that I'm a life member in, being of service through those processes. And yes, there's no question that Black people disproportionately are killed at the hands of law enforcement officers. Sometimes we know that that could be justified, and then there are times when it is unjustified. We are living in a time where we saw the murder of George Floyd that happened right before our very eyes, and we know that there was something that moved us that was not right about that. So I joined other people, not just African Americans, but other Americans who believe that the time is now for some criminal justice reform. I can tell you that for the nearly 4 decades that I was in law enforcement, the system was always under reform. And so I chose to try to bring about the change from inside. Others chose to try to effect change from outside the organizations. So we do need men and women who look like us to step up to the plate and join these law enforcement agencies, so that these agencies have the right sensitivities as they provide police services to the community. There's no question that in order for America to be safe, America needs law enforcement officers. The fundamental reason that government exists is to keep the people safe. Safe. And that means that the best way that we can do that is have a diverse group of people who are policing us in this country. But I will tell you that sometimes I think is not readily focused upon that from policing the Black community and other communities at large. I can tell you that I saw a significant number of Black people being killed by other Blacks. And we should be sometimes just as outraged because of Black on Black crime that occurs. It does not mean that we should ignore that. I believe that sometimes people of color live in communities that, because of systemic racism, they have these social inequities and challenges before them that they didn't create, but they find themselves being socialized and living in a certain way. And who is to blame? There's a lot of blame to go around the reason why we have unequal access to health care, to quality housing, to good paying jobs, and even our educational system. There are reasons why that happens. And so we all have to fight to bring about those changes. And so the way that you can effect change is be part of the solution. Don't just identify the problem. You got to become part of the solution to have the type of effect and outcomes that we all look forward to. So yes, this is a time like no other because of technology, I believe, where it's ripe for another period of police reform. I volunteer on the Florida Commission for Law Enforcement Accreditation to review the standards by which police agencies are trained and how their policies are developed, or at least shown to be model policies, are established through this entity. Even though I have retired from law enforcement, I see it as my moral responsibility to get involved in shaping those policies and standards and training by which law enforcement officers are going to be held accountable. Every good law enforcement officer should not have any problem with being transparent and ensuring that they are an open book, and that any training policies and procedures that are developed, any use of force that is used, the public should be in a position to be able to review that and give direction to our governmental subdivisions on what they expect, what they demand out of our law enforcement officers. And so I'm encouraged some things are changing because the time is now to bring about some of the changes that's needed. And again, this is an evolutionary thing. The changes that will be made in the near future will not solve this challenge for us forever. There will always be a need for our citizens to review the law enforcement training and policies and procedures as the world changes around us. And so I just have chosen to be part of it, to get into the arena and not simply sit on the sidelines and watch things happen, but to make it happen. From my ability to control a budget, we fund the sheriff's office, we fund the jail, and I get to, because of that, make public policy that can impact the delivery of services by law enforcement officers here in this community. My wife chooses to serve at the federal level, where federal laws are being made to ensure appropriate accountability of our law enforcement agencies. And I would encourage anyone to get involved. We should become the judges. We should become the prosecutors, the public defenders. We should be the school teachers. We should be the mentors for people who look like us and for those who may not look like us. We have to get involved in the lives of our young people from an early age, right through the formative ages, and hopefully teach them an entrepreneurial spirit, what it's like to own your own business, to own something, and truly then transfer the wealth to future generations.
Mr. Mayor, we're running short on time, but I'm going to ask you a few more things, and you can give me some lightning rod answers here. 3 things as a former law enforcement officer you think we absolutely have to change within, as we think about reforming or reimagining policing in this country. 3 quick things.
There's no question we need to change some of the use of force policies to mirror the world that we live in today. And I believe that is going to happen. I believe we have to change the way we recruit law enforcement officers, and then we have to change the way that we train them. I believe that sometimes when law enforcement officers are exposed repeatedly to various traumatic events, because of the law enforcement culture, those traumas that law enforcement officers themselves have experienced have not been adequately dealt with. And that translates into a poor human performance. And we have to now look more at a system of care to ensure that law enforcement officers get the appropriate mental health counseling, the appropriate supervision, and the appropriate training in order to deliver the type of quality service that we all want to see.
What role can the church play in helping shaping policy decisions, number one, but also helping shaping the agenda, even in places like where you serve as mayor? What role does this church play in all that? Because sometimes we've programmed our mind, or others have tried to program our mind, that the idea of being a good Christian is paying our tithes and offering, coming to Bible study, coming to revival, big meeting as they call it when I grew up, or coming to a worship service, vacation Bible school, read your word, pray, and go home. But what else can the church do in terms of helping shape what's going on around them in the world they live in?
As you know, the Black church has played an instrumental role for decades now in the civil rights movement and the leadership to bring about equality for Blacks and all people. There have been many leaders from the Black church that have
Absolutely.
played crucial roles in that process. I do think that we have to continue to reevaluate and adjust in the services that the Black church provides to ensure that we are getting the population, continuing to have a focus on faith. I believe that the church is struggling somewhat now because of many of the distractions, I will say, that our young people have today with technology, doing virtual learning and virtual meetings and other things. There's still a need for us to socialize and to be taught some of the basic religious principles. So I believe that the Black church plays a pivotal role in holding elected officials and public officials accountable. They have to do that by being involved and volunteering on some of these boards that shape policy, by running for local, state, and elective office. They have to be part of the solution. Our church has to be part of, I think, helping to even train our young people on how to maneuver through this world, this quickly changing world that we live in. So I believe in the Black church, and for a reason, I have chosen to continue a lifelong membership in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I believe it is central to our overall survival as a human race to be involved in our civic activities as a community.
Mr. Mayor, I oftentimes say to people, when the Ame Church leads, the country succeeds. And I do believe we have a role to play. What you probably did not know, Mr. Mayor, is my middle name is Orlando. So the fact that we're doing this interview from Orlando, Florida, tickles my little southern ears, the fact we're doing this. You are the elected mayor of this county. I think everyone, no matter what they may pursue or what they do, has a end in mind in terms of what they want to accomplish. My last question for you, Mr. Mayor, as I let you go, because I know you're a busy man. What do you hope to accomplish when the ink dries on the pages of history for the first African American mayor of this county? What do you hope the pages of history will read and say about you?
When my job is done, I hope that others will be able to look back and see that we provided access to greater access to all of the equal access to healthcare, jobs, to better wages, better education. I will move that needle through the programs that we will put in place. I will tell you that when my time is up, I want people to look back and say, did he level the playing field? Did he create access to people who look like him and who didn't look like him? And so my staff is very reflective of the community that we serve in here. And I have some African Americans serving in high roles and high places. They're the first to serve in those roles. That's what we can do. So in order to get there and to make the kind of decisions that I get to make, you do have to get into these positions, and you have to do so by holding yourself to a high standard. And I hold myself to a high standard. I'm a man of faith. I'm trusting that God put me in place at a time such as these to bring about the changes that we're making here within this community. And so I am going to continue to pray first, aim high, and stay focused.
Mr. Mayor, I thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to sitting down with your your wife, and hopefully the next U.S. Senator from Florida tomorrow morning. And I thank you for what your family has provided to this little 245-year-old experiment called America. The closer your government is to you, the more important it is for you. And so your role, being police chief, being the sheriff, and now mayor, has certainly been, I think, a transitional and transformational for communities that look like ours and for constituencies that look like those who come from where we come from. So I thank you, and I thank you for your time, and certainly we are honored to be in your county, sir.
Thank you for having us, and we wish you well during the 51st quadrennial of the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
God bless.
God bless.
Well, thank you all for joining us. We will be back, I think, later on today with some more continued dialogue here for the Christian Recorder. As always, shout out to the staff who makes these things possible, who are much smarter than me with their technology instincts and abilities to make certain that these things are broadcast all around the world. And we're so grateful. And certainly to my dear friend and my brother, the editor of the Christian Recorder, John Thomas. Thank you for trusting me to be a part of the Christian Recorder family. We'll see you soon.